Okay, look, thanks for coming along. Look, this little discussion or presentation is based in my fortunate 2 weeks I spent towards the end of my long service leave in the Kimberley with Victor Hunter, who is, some of you remember us, who gave the talk at the awards night a couple of years ago. And it's one of the things that I would actually like more staff to do if we get the chance to talk about the kind of stuff they do, maybe slightly extracurricular, but certainly on their sort of study leaves and what have you, because I think often interesting things happen. And for me, this one was incredibly fortunate. Again, I got to go to the Kimberley. It's the 4th time I've been up there with Victor. Always seeing it, especially for a white fella Victorian, it's quite interesting to go to the Kimberley with a black fella because you see it from completely the other end. It's kind of exotic, which is, for most of us who grew up in Victoria, it's quite astonishing to see, I guess, what most of us would call the kind of real Australia, and as Richard Weller would call them, some real Australians. So it's a bit of a travelogue, and it's got some commentary about my trying to understand the relationship between white fellas and black fellas, black fella culture, the enormous kind of positives and negatives that exist up there, the starkness of how amazing it is in both directions is quite breathtaking, really. And I do consider myself incredibly lucky to have travelled with Victor, because both of us can talk underwater. So for the 2 weeks, it's pretty full on, just talking about issues and trying to understand, I guess for both of us, bouncing off each other understandings and interpretations and situations. So, and of course, as part of my role here, I'm suggesting that as professionals you should do it all the time, and please don't underestimate how incredibly fecund that is to just be bouncing stories off colleagues, particularly if they come from a different camp, and what that might do, more particularly for yourselves as architects, because you have to deal with the world, and it's often not your world that you're being asked to deal with in terms of making buildings. So there's a bit of me, and then there's a couple of quotes that I want to read, and I've probably got too many images, so some of them will go fast, and we'll just see how we go. I guess I don't mind if you stop me halfway through, or partway through if you've got a question, if something's not clear, so I'm happy with that. The first thing is, for me, flying over Australia, especially during the day, is always astonishing. I just find it astonishing. And even with your shitty camera pointing out the porthole window, every now and again you can look down and just get the most amazing images. And for me, certainly as a architect designer in Australia, to try and understand this place, particularly its aesthetic values as presented and represented by the place itself, I find incredibly expansive, just trying to understand why this place looks the way it does, for me, how incredibly magnetic that is, and then trying to see how others have interpreted it, because that's what I find myself doing anyway when I try to do work. So flying over the land of Oz is always amazing. The title of the talk came about because where I was staying at Mount Pierre Station, just lying on the ground near the single men's quarters where we stayed, was what was left of a cow, or a cattle, and it was just a hoof. I assumed the dogs had eaten whatever was left of the bone, and I was just walking past it and laughed at it, and Jimmy Shandley, the guy who's the station manager, just looked at me and said, "Be careful there, that bastard, he'll kick you." And of course it was just a classic line that it just came out of nowhere, and it was quite funny, because of course it wasn't going to kick me, but he just delivered it straight at me, and then just kept walking. So I thought that was pretty cool. So where I was near Fitzroy Crossing, which is in the middle of the shot, and some of you may know Fitzroy Crossing because it's pretty infamous, certainly. Outside of Fitzroy Crossing, it's probably pretty infamous inside Fitzroy Crossing, but certainly it's a pretty tough place. It's hardly describable as a town, but it is a town. And it must be freaky for people from overseas to look at a map like this, and this is from Google Maps, and there's a place called Mueller Ranges. There is no place called Mueller Ranges. So if you're in Italy and you go, let's go and stay at Mount Hardman, that looks like a good place. There's nothing there. Like, I don't know why it's a dot. There is a Mount Hardman, but there's no township there. And I was at Fitzroy Crossing, so right in the middle. And when you get closer, it starts to look like this, and there's the crossing up here. And we were staying out here somewhere. So, it's incredibly populated. You can see the density of an urban sprawl. And as his name just slipped out of my mind, the famous photographer in Australia who takes aerial shots, Dutchman, can't remember his name. Anyway, he says out here, he said he loves flying over Australia because you can see the bones of the country and you can see the skin, and that's definitely the case here. And where I stayed was here. In fact, that's the single men's quarters, and that's the ablution block. That's the homestead where Jimmy and Joy lived. That's the shed that always had the light on. And that's the community. What's the name of that community, Victor? What's the name of the community?
Gallaroo Gorge.
Gallaroo Gorge community there, which has about 8 houses, at least 4 of which had the lights on, all the lights on 24/7, with the generator going 24/7, and there were only people there about 50% of the time. And I think when the people came, they stayed not in the houses with the lights on, so they got to turn the lights on in the other houses. And you start to think, wow, this is such waste and incredible kind of abuse of privilege, but it's actually not that at all, and I'll hopefully try to explain that. Yeah, they were the ablution facilities, but I used to wash here. I used to walk down to the creek past the card dump and wash down there because it was just so pleasant. And the country is astonishing. If you haven't been out there, any of you who have been in the land of Oz for a while, if you haven't been out there for a while, particularly visiting overseas students, I know it seems scary. Nothing's going to kill you. Nothing's going to eat you. It's probably more dangerous to swim in Perth these days than it is to travel through the country. You should get out and have a look because it is astonishing. And there's, I think the technical term is a fucking lot of it. And I was lucky enough to be up staying with Victor on an Aboriginal, on a cattle station that was run by an Aboriginal corporation. And this is Jimmy Shandley, the man who's the station manager, and that's his son driving the other Toyota. And I'd been up here before, but this time the culture shock was probably more amazing because I got off the plane, Victor picked me up in Broome, we drove the 500 k's straight through to Fitzroy and then on to Mount Pierre. First time I got out of the car was to go and sit with Victor, Jimmy, Joy and her brother, and they were talking about issues to do with dealing with Indigenous communities and white fellas and stuff, and I'm the only white fella there, so it's pretty culture shock for me coming from, because I'd flown straight from Melbourne there, so it's kind of eye-opening. I'm sure for Victor it's just completely part of the circuit, but for me it's kind of eye-opening, and so I get to spend time with these fellas, and that was pretty amazing. This is a shot of Victor. We'd visited another community. And this one, I can't remember. Victor will remember the name. Mungadi, which is about 80 k's from Mount Pierre, where I was staying. We drove out there to see a couple of people. This look is pretty standard. Just vehicles in disrepair, stuff kind of lying around. It's not abusive. It is incredibly wasteful, but it takes you a while to get your head around how this occurs. And I entitled for myself this photo. This is the photo of Victor in the land of good intentions, because everything you see is done effectively with the best intention, and it just misses the mark. Just misses the mark for whole lots of what I come to understand as quite complex reasons, and they're not as straight-faced as you think, and they take a long time to get together. So I'll attempt to get through some of that today. So this is where I am. I had been out here before with Victor, actually 20 years ago. We were just talking about it the other night. This is a place called Gillumbuddy, which is on the top of the Great Sandy Desert, and I went out there with Victor a long time ago to work on a project to do some housing out there. And it was an amazing project. in this incredible country, and this is where there was an old couple who were staying out there, and I think the Toyota was in there, and they were living outside because, you know, it's worth protecting the vehicle because they can look after themselves. And we did a scheme for it. This is a model that was made. And it was never built. We couldn't make it through whole lots of protocols. Victor was very brave in allowing us to pursue it, and it was kind of an interesting thing to do. It was better than interesting. I did hear somewhere that someone else had done something similar on another station, but I could never locate where. But this was published, and someone rang me up and said, "I've seen that scheme somewhere." So Mary Ann made this model, and it was an idea about a different way of living. There was a communal kitchen, blah blah blah. So we couldn't get these through as houses, even though we thought it had things to offer. And I got to write an article about it, and I said things like this: interesting project, this one; difficult project, this one. And I even tried to write it in kind of groovy, all over the place script, so it was written like the place was, where it was inconsistent and slightly ragged. As architects, this project was given to us with uncommon generosity of intention. This is another thing that I have to say about particularly me working with Indigenous communities, is they're unbelievably generous, especially considering the condition that we generally have put them in and the conditions under which they operate. The generosity is amazing. It was very lucidly and knowingly explained to us that we weren't being asked to solve the issue of housing in remote communities, as this was a much bigger issue than simply the supply of reasonable, maybe even suitable accommodation. That's another thing that hits you as an architect. You go out there and you think you can solve these things architecturally, and you go, it's a much bigger story than that. You hopefully can make some interventions into it, which may be more successful than others, but you very quickly realise that it's a much bigger issue than the one that you might be able to address, certainly simply via architecture. But nonetheless, we were very graciously invited to do it. It was, however, stressed to us that we should not, under any circumstances, repeat failures that had previously been visited on other Indigenous communities, particularly those visited on remote communities. And when I said before it was a photo of us sitting in the land of good intentions, that's what really strikes you, that you see the best intentions rubbed up against the stuff of life, and they just get nowhere, and they just end up looking incredibly bad. And yet, largely they were done with good intentions. I then after that wrote, and it seems, blah, 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 right down the bottom. Anyway, this scheme couldn't find its way through the accountability protocols. But we were uncomfortable because, as you now read this was an article that was written, that's me, we get some advantage from the scheme. But the people from Gillumbuddy got a model, or was it some rather strange, useless toy that the Guttier mob, because white fellas are called Guttiers up in the Kimberley, left with them, if you understand this point. Anyway, that's enough ifs and buts. So I was trying to say, again, we gave it a go, but we got more from it than the people at Gillumbuddy, because I got to write an article and it got published and all that sort of stuff. So that kind of rubs on you after a while. So then we were invited again, slightly later on, to have a look at another community. And this time we thought we'd have a fiddle with symbolism. So we based a plan on a giant kind of fish symbols, and we did some pretty interesting work. And Joseph Lavelle, who's now tutoring in the first years, worked on this one with me. And we thought we were getting somewhere, because we were really trying to open up the idea of what a house might be, how the communities live, the relationship to place. Start with a symbol, and suddenly all the rules are off, so you can really go for it. These rules which are repeatable, but they don't fit forms, whole lots of interesting architectural things. We drew it lots of ways to see what its density looked like, what its composition looked like, what its aesthetics are like. We framed it up, we worked out how you might be able to build it. Yeah, we did images so you could sleep on top of it, you could sleep in it, you could be out of it, you could be around it. It had interiors and exteriors. It didn't have any glass you could smash. Could be made out of the local materials. So we pushed a whole lot of stuff. But again, it was very difficult. I again still feel very lucky that Joseph and I got to work on it and we got to this point. But it didn't go anywhere. So I'm just showing you these because I've been thinking about this for a while, and because I've been thinking about it for a while, its impact on how I saw this last visit was quite important. Then, just for fun, Joseph and I floated another idea where we thought, let's have a look at doing an Indigenous place project. So this one was for Victoria. We did some maps of Victoria, placed the communities, came up with a kind of way that they all might gather, and then put it on a painting to see whether that might give us a new way to do it. And we did some pretty beautiful drawings about it. Joseph turned this into a 3D rhino thing, and it was quite a beautiful thing. And that square is 750 metres square, so it was quite a big project. So we had done this, looked at it, thought about it, and I'm just saying this because give you a bit of background, and then I get to Fitzroy Crossing this time. And again, I'm going to say, if you ever get a chance to go up there, folks, you should take it up. You should go. It is astonishing in lots and lots of different ways. And it doesn't matter that the guy who runs the gene shop can't make the sign make sense, because you apparently only get one gene. But that's the shop sign in Fitzroy Crossing.
Is that the Samson Delilah one?
I think Samson Delilah is actually filmed in South Australia, because it's based in that kind of tough environment. Yeah. Fitzroy Crossing is a town, whereas Samson Delilah is really set in what would be a remote community, probably. Yeah. Fitzroy Crossing is pretty full on because, but as I said, I've always come in from the other side, which means I've come in from the blackfella side, travelling with Victor, and he was determined that I go to the Fitzroy Crossing Inn at noon because you get breathalyzed on the way in at noon, because the rules for drunken behaviour in the Fitzroy Crossing Inn, they stop serving beer for an hour. And then you're really unpopular. And the bar is pretty tough, but it's completely civilised, and everybody's sitting down having a drink, and it's $7 a can, is it, Victor? I think it's $7 for a green can. And people are very quiet. There's nothing else to do for most Indigenous people. There's nothing to do. There's just nothing to do. So that's why you go to the pub. But the pub, as is the lodge, as is the supermarket, as is, I think, one of the petrol stations, as is the hardware store, are all owned by the collective of Indigenous communities in Fitzroy Crossing. And if we had more time, Victor and I could talk about, certainly he could fill you in about how much money they must have in the bank and how inept they are at making that money available to the communities to do things with, because they have no training in how to run a business, but they run businesses which can't help but make money because they're the only business in town. And it's kind of astonishing. Then there's wildlife, and there's the country, and the country is amazing. Now we're on the station. This is on the station at Mount Pierre. Mount Pierre was the station where we stayed. And to give you some idea of the conditions, I'm giving you a bit of background so I can talk about it. This is where I slept. This was my bed. I slept on the veranda of what was the single men's quarters, and that was my view out to the fire pit. The fire pit where we sat around every night and the crowd of people varied a little. In the end, there were about 8 or 10 of us staying there. I think, in fact, it was about 50-50, wasn't it, men and women, males and females. Many people related to Joy and Jimmy, the people who were the station managers, but a few other people who had worked with them a lot. And there was a little girl who was about 7, and Victor pointed out to me that, how come she's not at school, Des? Because I was on holiday, so I just thought, oh, she's on school holidays, but in fact she wasn't on school holidays. She was just out there, like 63% of the kids in Fitzroy Crossing who don't go to school, because the attendance rate at the school is 37%, and they have a brand new school. But they don't go to school because school is kind of irrelevant, and the idea of relevance is a tricky thing. So and I must say, we would sit around here every night around the fire after we'd eaten, while we're eating, talking. And for me, it was fantastic because I'm the only white fella there. But also, for many of the people, Victor introduces Des as a professor of architecture from Deakin University in Victoria. And you can see people going, Professor, never met one of them before. What do they do? So their acceptance of me and their quietude towards me was quite interesting, and it took me a couple of days to get over that. That's the ablutions facility, the shed in the background there. It's lots of frogs and calcium, because the calcium content in the water was just scary. Victor's working on that one. And there's another sleeping quarters, which no one's sleeping in that one anymore, because that one's been trashed. That's the kitchen. The kitchen was scary. And these guys were great. I have to say, these guys were great. The scary bit was I got used to it after a few days. But I must say about, particularly in Indigenous communities, these guys are tough. Shit, they're tough. Their resilience is incredible. They just soak this stuff up, and it just rolls off them. Stanner has a way of putting it that he describes Indigenous attitudes to life as a one possibility thing, a once-for-all character. A once-for-all time character is what the life has. And it's this capacity to just roll through the specificities. Just however life comes at you, it just comes at you. It's not something you necessarily have directional impact on. Takes you a while to get your head around. And it's not that people don't care, it's just the care level and the concern level and even the empathy levels are operating completely differently to ours, because there's a much bigger consistency they're part of. This is where I used to wash. It was just past the wet season, so all of that rubble on here. Well, this would have been, way underwater, probably a month or 2 months before I was there. So I'm just trying to show you the kind of how lucky I am that this is my bathroom. I was the only person using it. And these are the people that I worked with, and we're having lunch at another spring, and that tin there is full of little bream that the kids have caught. They're just boiling away, and that's lunch. Jimmy, Joy, just organising the crew, Victor there. We're just having a break from working on the station. For me, to be out there, these people, they know this country incredibly inherently. Like, they just know it. But their value of understanding it is something that certainly my culture can't quite get its head around, and we don't give it any value. And subsequently, to a large degree, they don't give it any value. One of the things that Victor is continually trying to do is set up, if you like, kind of tourism systems where we can go fishing with Lyle or shooting with Lyle, and he can show us the spots. And he can see that that's valuable. They see it, blackfellas just see it as what you do. It's not valued by them because it's just what you do. But subsequently, to us, it also doesn't have a value. So the knowledge base that they work with is disjointed or disconnected from the one that we would use. I think Victor would also agree that it's the oppressor system controlling the freedom of those who are oppressed, because they don't like to move into unknown territory. This was a photo that they just had in their archive, and I just took a couple of shots. And Lyle, the guy who I'll mention a couple of times, the young bloke who I worked with a bit, he's one of those kids, and I don't think anybody went hungry that day. Do we call those Barneys, Victor? Is that the term? Yeah. Yeah, that's Lyle. He's one of those kids. I don't know which one it is, but he's the guy that I was working with. And this is what I was working on. I was working on a cattle station. They were a little bit surprised that I worked, because they thought I was there on holidays. And they thought I should have a holiday. But for me, it was an amazing experience to work on a cattle station with cattle who are just basically wild. A few of them they've seen people before, but not very often. And there were cattle in there who'd never seen people because they'd been born in the last year since the last muster. So, and that big bastard in the background there, he jumped that fence, or a fence that high, twice from a standing start. he was not happy at one point. And Lyle was in there with him trying to get him to go through the gate, which even I thought was way too brave. But luckily, the second time he jumped the fence, he jumped into the corral where we wanted him, so he outsmarted himself just slightly. But to see, he must weigh 2 tonne, Victor? To see a 2-tonne animal jump a 2-metre high fence from a standing start and straddle across it and just mangle it on the way through, it was pretty breathtaking. This guy, Jimmy, this is an early photo of him. He's the station manager. He's an amazing guy. His father and Joy's father, and I'm saying these things because it gives you some sense of, for me anyway, the background of this guy, and particularly his wife, and then his kids and their grandchildren, the background they've come from, and then how he now operates in the world. So Jimmy's father and Joy's father, I understood, were really powerful lawmen in their respective camps. And I think Jim's father set up a community that the Gundiyandi people now occupy. Is that right, Vic? Yeah. And Joy, she comes from south of Fitzroy Crossing out in the desert country, and her father was another big lawman. I didn't get to meet them, of course, they've passed away some time ago. And Jimmy's worked on stations his whole life. Go-go station. So he knows all you need to know about sinking bores, getting water, dealing with cattle. He's now the station manager. He's the station manager. He's an incredibly capable guy, works incredibly hard, okay? But he's had no training whatsoever. He has definitely had no managerial training whatsoever. So for him to organise the station is all from first principles, almost from scratch, all day, every day. And he's turned the station around from a $750,000 loss, because the guys who took it over after he started it with his wife ran it into the ground for the sum of 750 grand. And Jimmy and Joy in 3 years have turned it around to be 250 grand in front, right? He gets paid 50 grand a year to do that, right? And he drives his own vehicle, and he puts largely the fuel in his own vehicle, and he thinks he's on a good wicket. Because there's no one showing him or training him or telling him about what his rights are, what his responsibilities are, any of that stuff. So as long as he's turning it around and he's an Indigenous man working for an Indigenous community, running an Indigenous cattle farm, that just ticks every positive box. But he doesn't get any support for it. And because his implicit tradition is to sustain conflict avoidance, treat life as it comes, see the bigger picture that just rolls on, and not argue and complain, he just rolls on. And of course everybody thinks he's fine. He's fine. But he's up against it all day, every day. And the other people who are working under him, they're working under Jim. So Jim does all the thinking for them. Because that's how they operate. Because the network hierarchy system is still in place. As Stanner says somewhere here, he says, I'm suggesting that the and this is for us to try and get our head around how this works. And if it's not clear, I'm not surprised, but I'll try to illuminate a little bit. Stanner, I think is a really interesting and great writer about, he's a white fellow trying to write about how he understands Indigenous culture. I'm suggesting that the association of European and Aboriginal has been a struggle of partial blindness, often darkened to sightlessness on our part by the continuity of the Aborigines' implicit tradition. And he says implicitness does not imply lack of power. By implicit tradition, I think he's trying to get at the fact that for someone like Jimmy and many Indigenous people, particularly in communities where the communities are pretty kind of stable and intact, 50,000 years of tradition is still right there. Like Jimmy's standing under paintings, which are quite remarkable. He's one of the few people who've been back to this place. That is, as Stanner says, implicit. But for us, implicitness is in the background and we don't give it any credibility. But it affects so much about the way he operates. but because we don't see its condition, we only see him relative to the way we work. We can't see the other thing that he's working with, which is his implicit tradition, which is incredibly powerful, about his responsibility, who he's connected to, where he gets training from, all of that stuff, as well as things that I've mentioned like conflict avoidance, no complaining, and just rolling through life. Because life is a big, overarching, consistent thing, right? Which they're just on a roll with. It's not something that you impact. Because this is where Jimmy went to school. And remember that Jim's 64, yeah? So when he was born, he was part of the flora and fauna. So he went to school in this cave, where Victor's now standing. I think I'm right in saying that, Victor, that's where he went to school? Yeah? It's pretty amazing for me to go there and go, really? That was where he went to school? And now he's a station manager. The school, as an archaeological, was a natural phenomenon. It's quite amazing. You go, shit, really? That's where you went to school? God, we really didn't care that much, did we? But now he's a station manager. And he knows all about the artesian bore that he and Victor are now talking about. So his background is coupled with the things that I'm trying to unfold for you. So to see him operate and to see the other people operate, you have to try and get your head around how impactful this completely other tradition and condition is on the way they operate. Because it's not simply the one that I use. And we love a good sign, big dam and pothole, because there's only two places to go, but the trucks kept going to the wrong one, because you always choose the wrong one. And I couldn't see the dam at Big Dam, and I'm not sure there's a pothole at pothole, but that doesn't really matter. Again, this is what they were doing, helicopter mustering. I didn't get to go in the chopper, but there's Jimmy talking to the chopper driver. And I'll give you this example. The chopper driver gets paid 15 grand a day, right? And there was 2 choppers for that day. There's enough cattle brought in to no worries deal with the cost of the choppers. But Victor suggested to Lyle that, because Victor is always trying to expand, particularly these guys, expand their world. Because their world keeps getting smaller and smaller and tighter, because the outside world just gets scarier and scarier because you get more and more removed from it. So when you're oppressed, freedom idea, this is something I get from a lot from Victor, the freedom thing is scary because it's the unknown. So you stay within the known. Even for someone like Lyle, who's 18 years old, he's a pretty handy guy. Yeah, he didn't go to enough school, so probably reading and writing is not one of his strong points. But Victor said to him, would you like to be a helicopter flyer? And of course you can see Lyle going, you fucking bet I would. But of course he says straight away, because he can see there's a form involved, you have to go to town, you have to study in Broome, I'm in Fitzroy, too hard. Victor says, I got people who can help you, blah, blah, blah. You can see Lyle. He's 18, you're pretty gung-ho as a young guy at 18. He's just going, no, too hard, just too fraught. He can surf his way around the phone, he can find anything on the interweb he wants, he can do all that kind of stuff. But having the kind of, what we might call the fortitude to go out there and be the chopper driver, just a little bit edgy. I'm sure Victor's still working on him to try and get him to do it. But that, for me, that was an incredibly powerful example because I saw it in his eyes straight away. I could see him go straight away, you betcha, no thanks. Just too difficult. As an architect, of course, you go and visit these places and you can't help taking architectural photographs because there's amazing stuff goes on. And this is part of my occupational health and safety instructions, because these are the working conditions. They're just, there's lots of high-vis vests and gloves and stuff. And you do marvel at the equipment because that little ratchet cog there is made out of little square 6x6 flat bar, which are then welded onto the curb, and you go, that's pretty clever. You probably don't know what I'm talking about. It's a pretty clever way to make a little ratchet so that it's almost indestructible because there's a 2-ton bull going to be in there at some point who's absolutely keen to not be in there, and it's a pretty good little model. And, you know, you can get some good shots. So here's more occupational health and safety, just to give you an idea about the world that these guys generally operate in. Yep, it's Toyota Dreaming. Neither of them are registered. They both went pretty well. They were both pretty hammered. But we had to drive 50 k's down the highway to get from the house to the station. And they're both unregistered. And Lyle's 18, but he doesn't have a licence anymore. And he was driving one of them. It's just what you do. Like, just roll on. And I was driving one of them. I probably shouldn't say that because the Vice-Chancellor will now sack me for not having my high-vis vest on and driving an unregistered vehicle. But these are the standard working conditions. Billy's working on chipping away at that metal so that Lyle can weld it with the welder. And I'm pretty gung-ho, but the leads on the welder was so shot that every time it touched one of the metal, the bare wires were there, it would half weld itself to the metal rod. And Lyle's standing there in his shorts with this thing dangling around his legs. I'm going, I can't watch it anymore, Lyle. I'm going to find some fabric and I'm going to tie it around the bare 450 volt cable that's rubbing up against your leg every now and again. He thought I was being a bit of a Nancy boy, I think, but I felt a little bit better for doing it. He thought absolutely nothing of it. And it's not carelessness, it's not couldn't care less, it's not irresponsible, I came to see it as just what Stano said, it's a one possibility thing. Life you just roll through it. It's a bigger thing than you, and your impact on it is not something that you're so overtly, transitionally conscious of like we are. So to us it looks like many Indigenous people are irresponsible, it's that the sense of responsibility has been completely removed from them. Because the government, which is us, have said to them from day one largely, and people like Victor are a huge exception somehow, have just said, sure, whatever you do, it's fine. Like we'll give them, effectively they get a house, whether they ask for it or not. And then wonder why they don't treat it properly. And they go, well, I didn't ask for it. And then it breaks, the house breaks, like the plumbing breaks, and conflict avoidance means, Jesus, I'm not complaining, I'll just move out. And of course you move out and then the house falls into disrepair. And then a year later someone comes back and says, what'd you do to the house? They go, oh shit, sorry, I didn't mean to do it. And I didn't ask for it, you gave it to me, so what's the complaint mechanism for? And this goes through everything, including, and it falls down to us as looking like irresponsible, but it's not irresponsible, it's the mechanism of responsibility and the system that they work within is completely different to ours. Because they're incredibly caring, they're incredibly generous, and they are responsible, but it's a different kind of responsibility. And of course, you know, one of them breaks down in the middle of nowhere. No one bats an eyelid, like, sure, just roll on. Yeah, we'll fix it. Eventually we'll get it fixed. And Harry there, reckons he's got it sorted, and we're pumping. And Harry and Billy are completely unfazed by this. I should say that in the back you can see there's a couple of spare tyres, and when we left the next day, the back tyre on this particular vehicle was a bit flat. And we had the compressor going, and this is an example of the non-sequential thinking. We had the compressor going, and Victor said to Billy, oh, you better pump up the tyre on the back of the red one because it's a bit flat. And I kid you not, Billy looked at us completely straight-faced, and he's standing there holding the compressor tube, and he says, what would I do that for? We've got 2 spares. I go, really? And he just looked at us like we were from Mars. Why would I pump up the tyre? We've got 2 spares. We're safe. And we had to use one of the spares. So he might have had the last laugh on us, but the one that we had to change was not the one that was partially flat anyway. So this directness about the specificity is something that just keeps throwing me every time. He was completely unfazed by it. He wasn't having a go at us. He wasn't joking. He just said, Why would I pump it up? I've got 2 spares. If the issue is we need another tyre, we've got 2 tyres. It's not a problem. I don't need to pump it up now, so why would I? To us, it doesn't make sense, but to him, it was completely down the line. And then, of course, you need the correct tool for the correct job, or as Victor and I found, you need to go the right tool for the right job. Hand me that fucking crowbar. This was the closest we could get to a screwdriver, which just happened to be a 1.5-inch chisel, which was never going to cut timber. It might bruise your finger. It did eventually get us out of trouble, but only just. And when we got back to the station, Jimmy solved it absolutely completely without any recognition whatsoever. He knew how to fix it. And so I helped these guys put fences back up over creeks, which, you know, a month before had probably been 5 metres deep in water. So the fence just gets taken out and we just go out and put it back together. And they just happily work with me. For me, it's amazing experience. To work with this guy, Billy, who is an amazing character, but could sit around all night around the campfire and listen to endless stories about things, conversations about people, and hardly join in because it's just a little bit too outside his comfort zone, particularly with Des there, who he doesn't know, and Victor, who he did know a little bit, and then other people moving in and out. Could sit there all night listening to us tell stories. And blackfellas have stories for everything. I have to say that. I learned that really early on. I certainly got that from Victor. The specificity about things is something that I struggle with, because we abstract and we aggregate things brilliantly. We aggregate into this and this and this, you add them together, and it ends up in this category. Indigenous culture doesn't work like that. There are just specific stories about everything. And they've got a million of them. And they all belong very specifically. So that's why Billy says, why would I pump up the tyre? I've got spares. Because he doesn't need to add thing, pump up tyre, don't need spare. He just goes, oh, if the tyre goes down, I've got a spare. Not a problem. That's his specific story. You see it time and time again. And Billy was definitely one of those guys. Yeah, and it's great fun. You know, these guys just know the country. So making morning tea and stuff, yeah, it looks easy, but they just roll into it. And for someone from the city, I'm used to camping a bit. It was just great to see them. So I feel like a visitor. I feel like an alien. And yet, you know, to quote the Qantas ad, I call this place home. But this is really home for these guys. Yeah. I've kind of lost my way a little bit, which is not really a problem, I suppose. But the other thing that comes from this, which struck me this time, and I think it troubles everybody, and I'm just going to say it to you because I know it's worth trying to get your head around, is the waste is incredible. Just the sheer waste of stuff is incredible. This is just for Mount Pierre Station. There's just vehicle after vehicle after vehicle, just stripped, wrecked, bashed. And you know, these are old ones, but there's stuff there with number plates on it. There's one car there that must have been there maybe a month. It was on its side and it was starting to disappear. People are suggesting things like, because there's no jobs, this is the other thing about the outstation things, where people are saying close them, and I'll get political here, because I do agree with, certainly I got it from Victor, but I agree with it. There are people living in these places like the station next door, the outstation next to it, there's nothing to do. There's nothing to do. And of course people want to be out there, and they go, oh, we need jobs. And Victor would say, well, what are you going to do? Put the jobs in a semi-trailer and truck them out there for them? There are no jobs. There's nothing to do. So people are suggesting what you should do is get these guys to strip these vehicles down, package up all the parts, and send them down to Melbourne or Sydney. Because there is no occupational health and safety up here, but you can't go to the Geelong Wreckers and go out the back and get the rear vision mirror for that Commodore you just bought. Because occupational health and safety won't allow you to do it. So people are saying, well, why don't we turn that into an industry? Because there's so much waste, why don't we use some of the waste? And I found these things quite interesting and challenging. You know, and the Gillarong community bus somehow ended up on the Mount Pierre station, not quite in the condition that it maybe got there in. And everybody wants was it a H something ute, is it? Yeah. Someone drove it there. It's not going to drive away though. Some bits just confound you, and I had to put this in because Victor sent me the photo. The guy who threw the boulder big enough to do that to the windscreen of the car is the owner of the vehicle. And I believe his wife was in it at the time. And she was going to go to town and he didn't think it was a good idea. And the vehicle's been there for months?
2 years.
2 years. Make that 24 months. When we were there, we were pinching petrol out of it so we could start another motor on something else. And it's just going to sit there and it's in the shed. So it's not getting rained on. 2 years it's been there. They drove it into the shed and they won't drive it out of the shed because they've got another vehicle. Another vehicle came from somewhere else. Disconnections. Okay, here's a good disconnection story, and Victor can correct me if I'm wrong, but disconnection story. The intervention and certainly Victor always refers to them as the troops. So the intervention, the government says we're going to hold 30% of your Centrelink monies, so you can only spend it on certain things. Yeah, but no one explains to the troops why this has happened, what's supposed to happen, what are the advantages, what is the outcome. It just happens. So, these three guys every week go, Jesus, 30% less than we ever had. And then a year down the track, Kevin looks at his bank account and says, Jesus, look how much money I've got. And then Theo and Diego look at theirs and go, Toyota's on the list of things we can do with the money. Let's go and get a Toyota. So they go and get a Toyota with the money from the intervention. Because no one explained what it was for. They didn't spend it on food and stuff like they were supposed to because no one explained it. They just made it through because there was 30% less money that was just showing up anyway. And then they can't get another Toyota because they can. Of course they can. And it's completely legit. No one's scamming the system. No one's doing anything bad. But no one's explaining down the line exactly what all this is for and how this is supposed to unfold. So you get these damning images back to us because it's completely non-sequential at the other end. And of course, the more that happens, the more the people up there remove themselves from the system because the system gets more and more difficult for them to deal with. As we started to say, the Indigenous communities, they're the survivors. They're the incredible survivors. The government's thrown everything we can at them and they're still there. And you know what the government's going to do now? It's going to throw more at them. And they'll still be there at the other end of that. This was the place you saw before, which I have to say as an architect, because I go there and I go, who the hell planned this thing? How did the buildings end up where they are? Did anybody ever think that this was going to turn into a place a long way from nowhere that might even add up to something? And then you're looking at it going, what are those steel tracks in there for? What was that for? And then you go, bloody hell, there used to be a donga in there. There used to be an accommodation unit under that roof. And somehow they got it out without taking the roof off. So then you think, how bad was it that you had to pull it out of there and leave that in its place? And somehow you got it out without that. So you just see all this incredible stuff which just doesn't add up. You just wonder, how the hell does that happen? And there it is, just example upon example of it. Yep, an amazing country around it, And kids, kids are going to play there, aren't they? It's just, you just want to play there. Especially in the summertime in the Kimberley. It's just heaven. Really? There was probably a government grant for play equipment. But at the same time, these guys have mustered up enough muscle and they're going to set up a little bow shelter, which are being helped by some really interesting people who you move around to assist in trades, and they're going to start selling artefacts and stuff from this. They're just at the highways just to the right-hand side of the photo. So you see these sort of what we might call grassroots events taking place. And the couple who both drove this Toyota and drove another one were quite interesting people, and they were very happy to find Victor because they'd been chasing him all over the country to try and get hold of him. And you see people doing this, but they're doing it off their own bat. They're having to do it outside the system because the system is just too unwieldy. Because the system ends up with this kind of stuff. You know, this is the ablution facility at the community next to the homestead where I stayed. And the sink is completely unusable because it's so clogged up with calcium, because the calcium content in the water is so high. You just go, how did the dunny end up out there? Someone disconnected it. There's no dunny in there anymore. Someone disconnected the dunny and the pan and left it there. What's it doing there? So nothing is useful anymore. Completely useless. It's really astonishing. Bit of bush tucker just to prove that, you know, I did it. That's a bush turkey. There's this traditional cutting equipment. Cooked on there, and even Victor said to me, yeah, it's okay, Des, I'll put it back on and cook it a little bit more for you. But I have to say, he cooked it a bit more so he could eat it as well, because these guys are tough. The bush turkey was quite good, but wow. It's pretty much still turkey, that one. There's not much meat. Needs a bit more cooking. Yeah, these are some of the other people I worked with. And then because I'm with people like Jimmy and Joy, who, I don't know what else to say, they're just over and above the system. And unfortunately, Joy's eyes are failing her. She's going to be blind in probably a couple of years, pretty much. Jimmy's 64. His sons are not much good. His daughters are amazing, working on the station, amazing. And their daughters and sons are pretty good, but they're up against it. Just for the heck of it, because I was up there, and I think because Vic was there as well, Jim and Joy said, oh, we'll take you through the little valley, through the range out to, we haven't been out there for a while, we'll go and have a look. So we trundled their troopy over the rocky grade to get into this unbelievable valley, which is just over the back. And even they hadn't been there for quite a while and said, oh, we must go out here again at some point. It's pretty, you know, I was pretty darn lucky, really. But I'm, you know, as Richard Well was saying, I'm getting to hang around the place with real Australians. And it was pretty amazing. The country is astonishing. Yep. And then on the way home, you look out the window, you go, what the hell is that? You see a couple of them every now and again. I think the holes are mine, but I don't know what the thing with the roof on it is. And I think that's a landing strip. So I don't know. Maybe it's the CIA, I'm not sure. But you just fly and go, it's in the middle of nowhere, like nowhere. These two perfect geometric shapes, one negative and one positive. As an architect, of course, you have to take a photo of it. You take about 10 of them. Just, what is it? And that's a snake. Yeah, that's a snake. Yeah. That's it. That's my travel log. Yeah. Don't know if you have any questions for me, but I was going to read Stanner, but I didn't, so I always lose track of that. And I could talk for hours about the experiences and the people I met. I'm probably not going to do that now, but if you have any questions or whatever, please ask me about anything to do with it. I'm not fazed by answering questions.
How long were you up there for?
Surprisingly, I was out there for 12 days. Yeah. And it was 24/7 for the 12 days, like start to finish. Wouldn't miss it for quids. And it was eye-opening, yeah. And I assume you're a bit like me, you're thinking, wow, that's pretty special getting to hang around out there with, you know, these kind of guys, for whom, you know, their attachment to country is 50,000 years. It's just breathtaking, completely breathtaking. Joy, who's the lady, we were all set to go to her country one day, which was to travel south past Woonka into the top of the Great Sandy Desert. I was really looking forward to that. But even they said we need 2 vehicles and one of the vehicles is not up for it. So in the end we couldn't go. But I would have been super duper lucky then to go out there with them. Yeah.
So
So what values about the land that you apply into architecture? You learn?
The aesthetic stuff I still work on in the compositional techniques like minimum nature of influence, lack of hierarchy, somehow dealing with how old the landscape is, all of those things I'm constantly up against them when I'm out there and I'm writing notes, taking photos. That's a straight Sidney Nolan photograph. Just without Ned Kelly, that's just the Sidney Nolan photograph of how the place composes itself. What I do get added into it, I must say, is that, particularly every time I go back to WA, because WA is pretty different to here in lots of ways. The sheer scale is what gets you, and I must say, and I'm probably on tricky territory here, but it's something that I've been thinking about for a while. It is amazing how impactful on us Indigenous culture has been, and you don't have to read many books to get that. If you read, say, Dancing with Strangers by Inga Glendinning, and there are many others, but hers is the most compact one. What you do understand is the blackfellas got us much quicker than we got them. So just simple stuff like they learn English way faster than we will learn any of their languages. And their additive culture, I see Indigenous culture as additive. It's an incredible network. There are no hierarchies, which also throws us. But then this place doesn't have any hierarchies. So I start to see similarities between the place and the people who've been there long enough to be just like the place. So the network thing, no hierarchies, is absolutely there. And I can take a photo like that, which I think is without hierarchy, other than the one that I injected into it, which is the tree, which is alien. So even the non-sequential nature of it is available to take in a photo. Indigenous culture also in WA has a huge amount of impact because there's so many places that use Indigenous names. And even here, just go out to Mount Moriac or Dreite or any of those ACT places, they're all blackfella names. But when I went to school, no one said that. So this impact, this effect of Indigenous culture on us is something which is much stronger than we normally give credit to, or certainly Indigenous cultures take credence for. And I get huge lessons from that. And of course, I can't help but look at Indigenous, what we call modern paintings, and see them as incredibly instructive about people just translating what they understand much more inherently into a language base, a painting, that I can take apart, study, understand. Yeah? Colour, form, line, composition, everything. It's just there. Of course, I don't have any of them here, but none of those guys went to art school. They just do it, which is also quite confounding. You just go, how do you do that? How can you just make that translation that clearly? And I get a lesson from it. Yeah. So that thing of how do I understand the country? For me now, because I've been lucky enough, I start to try and see lessons from Indigenous culture that I can see implanting itself or influencing whitefella culture and then our production. Also, I must say, the nature of us as Aussies is quite like the place. I'm quite fascinated by that. I think most places are like that, but we're like this place. And Indigenous culture is much more like this place than we are, and we get a lot from them. If you read early histories of Australia, the impact, when it wasn't brutal, the impact of Indigenous culture on the locals, like the Europeans, happens incredibly quickly. And I'm kind of fascinated by that. Like Australians knew themselves as Australians much quicker than Americans called themselves Americans. Like it was only half a generation that kids called themselves Aussies, right? Not Englishmen. So I'm very interested in that, and I think the effect of place is part of that. And part of it is its sheer generosity.
Can I just come in here? Yeah. See, one of the unfortunate things for Aboriginal people in remote locations like that is the fact that for whatever reason, we always end up with the people who can't make it anywhere else.
Yeah, this is an
They end
important
up in
point.
the Aboriginal community, and they have a litany of moving from one place to the other, ripping off the troops. The opportunity that I had with Des coming there, for him to see the sort of things, because he and I have been friends for over 20 years, and things that I was telling him and I just couldn't get through until the examples came in front of us. Then I was able to say that there, e.g. that we don't need to pump that tyre up because it's too on the back. You can't understand why they think like that. And these get all these other things. And the Aboriginal people accept their lot. They think that's what they're due. And what happens, if people saw a video on the 6th of June on ABC Four Corners called Ripped Off, in that, one guy went to the Aboriginals, he wrote out the contract, got them to sign it, where he had 6 times the ratio to their one. In the year 2012-2013, his income for the year, according to the audit report, was $6,600,000.
This is one guy.
One guy.
It's $18,000 a day, 7 days a week.
And he paid the 2 Aboriginals who protected him from changing the contract and getting forensic auditors in, $3,000 a day out of their own money. Not his money, their money. And because they don't know about auditing, they don't know how to read a financial statement. And I've had architects come along and I'm saying, why are you asking these people what they need in the way of a design for a house? They said, oh, well, they're going to live in the house. I said, no, they're not. The government's paying for that. Taxpayers are paying for it. So you've got to design it so that they can get the maximum benefit out of that house. I said, you tell me, what are the chances of those people asking you for a mezzanine floor? They wouldn't know what a mezzanine floor is. And I've got the good fortune of that young lady over there, her name's Maya. She's been here in Melbourne, down from Innisfail, with me going around with people that I've got here who's going to help me back in the Kimberleys. She's be coming up there and spending time with me there through a friend, another architect called Ian Molyneux. He's written books on architecture stuff. But these are the things that we're looking at. People who come there, not only to learn, but what it is that they can give to the community. Because the people there, when I say, oh, this is Professor Dare Smith, don't even know what a professor is. But he's my friend. So he's accorded everything that they can give him. And from their point of view, it's not much, but from Dare's point of view, it was a lot. And I said to him, when people say hi Gene here, they think you're saying hello to somebody called Gene. And you saw the conditions that people were living in and eating in. But when something breaks down, the normal thing is maintenance from day one going forward, not with the troops. And the same with fishing. You know, they don't go fishing, as Dare said, for recreation. They go fishing to survive. And that's it. And where Jimmy has taken people in to see the paintings in the caves, they've seen it, but he very rarely takes people in there unless it's a special occasion, and there's special people in his books. I'll finish with 2 things. I've got an older brother, and he can remember, he's about 4 or 5 years older than me, he can remember when policemen went past on horseback with Aboriginals naked with chains and manacles around their neck, walking 10, 20 of them walking behind the horse, and they were going another 250 miles to where the police station was. What I remember is that the first house that the traditional Aboriginal people lived in was in the early 80s in our area. No one did anything more than give them the key to the house. They didn't show them how to get the maximum benefit out of it. They didn't talk to them about orientation, where the sun came up, what sort of ceiling height you needed, all of these things. They just gave them a house that they thought was Allah, wherever. And it's the same as when English people came here, they tried to bring England here to this country. So when you go out and you design, and if you happen to be working in an Aboriginal community, you've got to think what is best suited for them, and that's part of your training. And even the location where they put that house, because in some of these houses they've been located in a place where they've driven there in June, July, but in December, January and February, water's about 8 foot high around where the house is. And so they've got to build the houses on big mounds and pump the tanks out after every rain. And there's one community where there's 12 houses, a shed. Nobody's lived in those 12 houses for 28 years. And they cost, when they were built, $350,000 when they were built. But they're still there today. Thank you. But any questions in that? We can talk. Okay.
Any other questions?
Why are the lights
Oh, because no one turned them off.
on? Okay.
It's as simple as that. And the people who live in the houses, and it's scary. But when I describe it, it'll sound like it's their fault. But I'm saying it matter of factly, so there's no blame involved. Okay. So every community has, because they're all off the grid, they should have solar. It's so dumb, it's scary. But, they've all got a diesel generator, right? And the diesel generator goes 24/7, right? So people just leave the lights on because it doesn't cost them anything. Someone puts the diesel in, the generator's on, the power's there, big deal. So we heard stories, and these ones, it gets really scary. The guy came round to that community, and he happens to work for the guy who ripped off the other communities for $6.6 million in 1 year. It's completely damning. But anyway, his company has the maintenance contract. So this young bloke comes here at a pretty brand new Nissan Ute, and he does the maintenance. He's a nice guy, does the maintenance on the generator. And I said to him, what was the usage on the generator? And he said to me, well, the fence has been cut again, which means someone's got in, yeah. And he said, so when you say usage, you mean how much the generator used or how many jerry cans worth? Because people drive out there, right? Because it's 120 k's back to Fitzroy. And so in terms of diesel, it's like a round trip's $45, $50 worth of fuel, yeah? So people go, let's go out to the community. It's completely fair enough, nothing else to do. Or get in the vehicle, drive to the community, shit, we've got any fuel. Have to get back to town. Easy. Let's get it from the generator. Not a problem. It's not malicious, it's just, well, we're stuck out here and we have to get back. The guys I was staying with told us a story. I think it was them who told me, it might have been Victor. And I'd been up to this community, near this community another time. Community a long, long way away from Derby, like 600 k's on a dirt road, serious dirt road. Like a serious trip to get there. There's a community up there, and there's a couple of blackfellas who are up there fishing. And they call into this remote community, because even they thought it was amazing. Call into this community, it's in the middle of edge of nowhere. And there's one guy there. This guy, I don't know how long he's been there. There's one guy there. And when they're leaving, the guy says, "Can you give me a lift?" They say, "Sure, no problem." So they give him a lift. And about 200 k's in, they said to the guy they gave a lift to, "Is there anybody else out there?" And he said, "No, there hasn't been anybody out there for months." And then they said, "Did you turn the generator off?" And he went, "Why would I turn the generator off?" But the truck supplying the diesel will do the 8-hour trip out there to put diesel in the tank. There's no one there signing the script, no one checking how much diesel went into it. Of course it was empty. Again, whether it was or not. It just goes on and on. The matter of factness, like, why would I turn the generator off? It's not my generator. It's not my problem. The fact that he's so far from anywhere is a completely other story. We were there one night, and I just love these stories. We were there one night because even Victor had to laugh. You can hear a car coming up the road. We're in the night, we're all sitting around the fire. You can hear a car coming. There's no lights. Sure enough, this car comes around and parks in the car park where we're staying. And a few people get out, and I'm going, the car's got no lights. But one of the girls gets in the car, and they're going fishing. So I stupidly said to someone, I think I said to Billy, I said, "Hey Billy, how come the car's got no lights?" And he looked at me and he said, "Because they don't work." Which wasn't really what I was asking, but it was completely the correct answer. But then it got better. He said, "It's okay, they've got a torch for the creek crossings." So they're driving on the dirt. We're a long way from the highway. The road's pretty rugged. He said, "It's fine, they've got a torch for the creek crossings." Well, they came back with 6 turkeys and a whole lot of fish. And we got one of the turkeys. And sure enough, 2 nights later, the same car with lights that don't work did the trip again. Everybody was completely cool with it. Yeah. Why don't you drive the car with lights? It's a full moon, don't need the lights, it's no problem, you've got a torch. What about when the torch runs out of batteries? Well, we'll get over that when that happens. Is that a problem? They just know the place, and these guys weren't very old. They just know the place so completely. And Victor's right, they're just going out, they're not going out for fun, they're going out to catch fish, catch barramundi. Good tucker, great, they're really good at it. No lights on the car, big deal. Who cares? Yeah. Amazing, absolutely amazing. Yeah.
They didn't fit the stereotype, though, did they?
No, absolutely not, no. The people I was staying with did not fit the stereotype. You know, they weren't lazy, they weren't indolent, they weren't abusive. There was no booze there, but, you know, there was no violence, nothing. But you hear stories that just scare you about, you know, the mistreatment and the maltreatment and what people do to one another, but I got absolutely none of that. And it was the same at the Fitzroy Crossing Inn. It was completely quiet. Victor was telling me, buy this guy a beer, Des. And I thought, shit, I can't do that. I can't just buy a guy a beer. And Victor's going, no, buy him a beer because it'd be really special that, you know, you're a friend of mine and you bought him a beer. You'll feel really good about that. So I do it, and I go, I don't know whether is that good or bad, but the guy was really incredibly friendly, chatting to me, chatting with Victor, left, see you later, Des. Nothing malicious, nothing at all. Just thanks very much. It's really nice of you. White fella came into the bar and bought me a beer. Shit, that's amazing. Yeah. Victor will tell you stories about, you know, me speaking to people and then them saying to Victor later, saying that's the first white fella who's ever spoke to me and not asked for something, or not wanted to give me something, and wanted to sell me a service. This is where Pearson's thing gets difficult because the blackfellas are complete users of services. They're never asked to supply any services. So that's where the lack of responsibility thing comes from. But it's not lack of responsibility, it's just like they're not allowed to do anything. You can ask an Indigenous mother, where will your son be at 18? I'll go, he's in jail. And you go, well, that's really bad. And they go, why is that bad? That's just, you asked me the question. The fact is, that's where he'll be. So if that's not the right answer, well, then ask me the right question. But we think, don't you extrapolate out that this is it? He goes, no, the question is, where will your son be when he's 18? Probably in jail. That's the correct answer. Don't you feel like that's your responsibility? The mother goes, no, because the government looks after him. That's what happens.
If you were to drive out there randomly, it's on your own, would you be welcome? Or do you need to go to someone?
Victor might be able to answer that better than me.
If I was to drive out there randomly on the road, would I be welcome?
Sure. And the only thing you have to do is name theirs or myself if you went to that particular community, and that'll give you entree. Because, I mean, I get people ringing up and saying they want to work with Aboriginals, and I ask them, who told you, who gave you my name? And if they can't tell me anybody I know, I tell them, if you want to help an Aboriginal, it's just like playing rugby, go and tag them. You can help them. But if you come in and you've got a name that you can give, then people will look after you. Because that person has done something for them. And in some places, if you talk about some of the things that you want to do and what they can give you, you can do for them, then it's it. But when way back in the 80s, I went on holidays in New South Wales. And what I did is I just travelled around and I went to the hotels where the Aboriginals were. And I just said to them, I'll go and buy food down the store, and if you let me come to your place, I'll cook your tea. And they gave me into it. Because if you go there on Slack week, which is the off-pay week, and they're hungry, you can buy food and cook and sell it to you. Yeah.
Kevin.
There's might be a difficult question, but I guess I'm trying to get an idea about the late Paul Floros and his work in relationship to the mindset that you've illustrated, because obviously he was talking a lot about just getting the basics right, fixing the services and amenities and getting all that right, but obviously you're painting quite a different picture to that. I'm just curious, how do you see that?
Yeah, well, look, I have the side that you know, and if I ask Victor about Paul Floros and Health Habitat, Victor will say they didn't really help anybody because they didn't leave the systems or teach people what to do. Am I correct in saying that, Victor?
See, Health Habitat works on sweat equity. So if they do something for you, they then want you to do something for someone else. And the Aboriginal people think, if we've had, from government's made them dependent on a whole range of things. And that's why I say that no one can outwait an Aboriginal, because he can wait forever, he knows government's coming. And it doesn't matter whether it's 2, 3 or 4 or 5 years, they'll wait. And I'm trying to tell them, here I've got an architect, I've got an engineer, I've got a builder who can supervise. You're an Australian, you're entitled to a $10,000 first homeowners grant. So all you've got to do is borrow $70,000, you don't have to pay for the land. You can have a house. They think about it and they say, no, I'll wait for government. And government is my biggest competitor. And I tell them, get out of the business and let me do things, because I've got people who can do it. And we are the biggest industry in the Kimberleys. We employ more people, we provide subsidised housing for public servants. So a teacher, a policeman, or any public service doesn't have to pay in a remote location, doesn't have to pay rent, doesn't have to pay electricity, doesn't have to pay water, or any rubbish administration. So whatever they get paid is all cop. They leave, but nothing changes for the troops.
This is the really tricky bit, yeah. Victor calls them Dolly Partons, 9 to 5. And then they go. And I mean, I wasn't doing anything, but in effect, I can't help but think, well, that was kind of me. Like, I go there for 2 weeks. It's fantastic for me. But Vic will say, it's great that I'm talking about this and maybe allowing you guys to understand a bit more, because that is something which ends up quite valuable for these guys, that more people know. Am I got this right, Vic? Yeah? It's an incredibly confusing situation. That's where, because you see the goodwill of all that, but then it doesn't go anywhere. This is what I saw time and time and time again. It just doesn't go anywhere, because the way the different cultures integrate or disintegrate is the trickiest thing. It is the trickiest thing, especially when these guys, they're just so fucking tough.
And
They
Paul
just-
Ferreros is supposedly even meant to be in the sort of top end of all that.
Yep. That's what's really difficult. That's what's really difficult. Yeah. And even at the other end, because the tribal and family natures also get in the way. Because on the way out to where we went and mustered the cattle, we drove onto a property called Mingalkala, which is a place where I went to the last time I went up with Victor. And there was a young guy from Fitzroy Crossing, Stanley, who, the same as Jimmy, one day after a big bender just said, "That's it, I'm never drinking again," which is a pretty tough call. So he never drank again. And he said, "I'm going to set up a community, right? I'm just going to do it." He's not very old. He was in his late 20s, early 30s. And I went out there. I don't have photos on this machine, but they had houses, they had school classrooms, they had solar generators. They got everything there. And you asked Stanley, "Where did you get all this from?" He said, "Got it for free. It's all stuff that people didn't want." So I just found them because everybody knows what's going on. I just waited till it came up, waited till someone had a truck, and we'd go and get that one, and we'd take it out to the property. Now, over a number of years, right? Amazing place, yeah? This time we went up there, completely abandoned. Completely abandoned. No government money required, nothing. No grants. You ask Dan, he says, "I'm not having anything to do with government. We're just doing this." 4 years later, I go out there, it's empty. No one using it anymore because there's been a kind of a family dispute and it no longer works and it's too far from town and people don't want to travel out there. Am I right, Vic? So it's sitting there just wasting away. There was one guy there one day, luckily, because we ran out of fuel or something and oil, and luckily there was someone there and we could get it, but that was just a fluke. So it works in both directions. So you end up against this kind of family structure, this kind of responsibility tribal structure, which can also just empty things out. Yeah. So it is really, really complex. But it's completely and totally fascinating as well. Particularly because, just like these guys, you just go, wow, you just know this place so incredibly. Yeah.
Vic shared the brief with me. It's an interesting read. What key elements from your experience would you like to relate to the brief and what the students will be doing with that?
Oh, for the third years? Well, actually, in a sense, I don't have anything key that I want them to do because I just wrote the brief and I just want the students to deal with it however it comes, because it's primarily an architectural instruction for them. And I can put my 2 bobs worth in if someone has an issue. And I'll call that kind of primary research, if you like. But I have to say that for me, whenever I issue a project to someone, I don't do the project. For me, it's important that I don't do the project. Otherwise, I'm just adjudicating people's work against what I would do, and I don't want to do that. There are certain things that I'm hoping that people will get a bit more illumination about, and some of it is to do with, particularly as people like Stanner have written, and I've tried to make clear this, the nature of Indigenous culture and its correlation to the way we structure things, like the completely different structural systems, and then the fact that Indigenous culture is much more additive than we are. So to some degree, whatever the guys might propose in the studio, the black fellas will probably suck it up faster and harder than the white fellas will, because it's just the nature of their nature. Yeah. But in terms of me hoping someone does something, I don't really work like that. So I'm not trying not to answer the question, other than I tend not to do that. Yeah. Any others? Otherwise, I'll just tell you anecdotes for the next 2 hours. Yeah.
Just describing, when you talk about Aboriginal people, when we're talking about the people in the remote locations,
Yeah.
when you look at Australia, you see 200 years, I'm talking in round figures, 200 years of white contact on the east coast, Perth in the southwest, 150 years. Where we are in Kimberley's and the Pilbara and parts of the territory, 100 years. When you go to the Northern Territory, WA, South Australian border, only 50 years of white contact. I've got a sister, we've got the same father but a different mother. We think she's 84, because she's born in the bush under a tree, but she can talk 16 different dialects from the local area. But when she dies, not one of her children, grandchildren or great-grandchildren can speak any of those languages. And she says, we send these kids, she fosters a lot of children. She said, we send these children to school. What's wrong with the school? Can't they teach them? There is no enrichment in the home. Nobody reading stories to them. And no structure in terms of bedtime. And there's no guarantee that the bed they slept in last night is the bed they're going to sleep in tonight. So when they go to school, and it's like running in a race, the further behind you get, the slower you run and you just piss off home. And 2 schools, one in Fitzroy Crossing, close on $40 million worth of buildings and structures and reticulation of everything. 37% daily attendance. You go to Balls Creek, only 46% daily attendance. And yet the government is concentrating on educating children. I'm saying the trouble is these children grow up and all your programs are for the bad guys. You've got no programs for the good guys. So someone goes to jail. They just built a $123 million prison in Deakin. And we're only 2% of the national population. We're 86% of the jail population. And these children are growing up, having children of their own, dying, never having a job. And we see this, and that's what I'm saying. For young people, you can study here, the guarantee of every one of you getting a job when you get out of here is pretty scary because of the way things are. But in the Aboriginal community, no one has been successful, including me. I've got a lot of hypotheses, but I've not been able to prove it because I haven't got the money. And with Dad coming here and this people here, hopefully that some of you here will come up with an idea on how we can do that. Because the Bureau of Stats telling us in every facet of Aboriginal society, in health, education, welfare, housing, employment, a lot, none of them are working. And yet people profess to have good ideas that are going to go somewhere. And I'm saying change will only happen for the people for whom change is necessary when they do something about it. And that's what
the tricky
these people here that
Yep.
I go to. I was talking to Dad, and I'm saying, these people have what the sociologists call an external locus of control. When you say, what do you reckon? They say, what do you reckon I reckon? They don't want to be making a decision because of the oppressed people. The greatest fear any oppressed person can have is the fear of freedom, and making a decision is one of those fears of freedom. So they don't even know how to do that. And the conflict of words that Des been talking about, they don't want to be spotlighted about anything. So if they come and tell you that I did something, then you stand up and say, oh, Victor did it, and I'll say, well, who told you that? And you say, he did. No, I never said anything. And you get the humour that underlies all of this. I took a group of 6 to Perth once, and one of them was, I'm in the hotel room, I get a phone call, 4 o'clock in the morning. This guy's telling me, Vic, it's Tommy here. I'm looking in this window and there's all these tattoos. Where am I? I don't bloody know. The phone cuts out. You don't know where every tattoo shop in Perth is. And so just standing in front of it. But that's the sort of thing you're looking at. And, you know, the guy, one uncle went to court and when JPs to jail people. And when he pleaded guilty, and the JP was an evangelical Christian bloke and he wanted to give him a fair go. So the question he asked him, have you ever been up before me? And the old bloke said, I don't know. He said, what time you get up?
But these are real stories. This is not a guy pulling jokes in court. This is for real. So, yeah.
So this is the thing that you're looking at. You know, the old women who can't read and write, you ask them, what bus you came on, you know, from one town to the next? They said, oh, we've been coming on that skinny dog bus. For the old greyhound. They don't see that. If they can't read and write, they have to And that's the thing right through. And it's the matriarchs in the community, and that's why I prefer to work with women. Because the men piss off and go home the first time they fall over. But the women just keep on going.
It's an amazing situation. It is an amazing situation. And yet, in the background is just unbelievable cultural depth. It is breathtaking. But the scary bit is about, like Victor's sister, 16 languages. When she goes, it's done. Victor refers to her as an endangered species because she is. It's really scary. It's really scary. I don't know what to do about that, but it is, as an Aussie, it's amazing that it's live, happening now. It must be even more live for someone like Victor. Yeah. I will say one other thing, which was, and then I'll finish, that one thing that I didn't bring up, and it's something that Victor and I have spoken about a lot, and I'm just going to send it back out to you, it's this kind of institutionalised racism as well, which is also part and parcel of, architects going to an Indigenous community and asking someone what kind of house they want, right? Because, they're supposed to be able, it's good for them to be free enough to give a response, and it's bad for me as an architect to go and sort of impinge on them about what a good thing is. Whereas in a white community, that wouldn't be the case. But the other side of the institutionalised racism, which I think is the very interesting one, is when you meet someone like Victor, and he could tell you millions of stories about this one, but you meet someone like Victor, and he's a sharp guy, and he knows how we operate, and he also knows how the blackfellas operate. And it's very difficult for you not to think, well, Victor understands our values, and therefore he'll come over and join our team to help us work out for the blackfellas. And Victor, I love his phrase for it, and correct me if I didn't get it right, but Victor says, you blokes are always the same. You never want a good football game. You want all the good players on your side. He says, I'm not interested in playing for your team. I want to play with my team so we can all have a good football game. Because I want to play for my side, not your side. Okay. And the problem with people like, the challenge with people like, I assume, Noel Pearson, etc., and Pat Dodson, is they end up playing on our side. They're playing for our team now. And we feel good about it. Stanner has I won't find it quickly enough, Stanner has a great phrase about that it makes us feel better for that. But people like Victor, and certainly his sisters and his brothers, they're playing for the other side still. They're trying to get us to understand what the other side is on about by still playing for that side. And I've seen it happen with Victor, where it's you can see people going, especially white fellas going, Victor's a good guy. He's like us. And Vic's going, no, I'm not like you, and I don't want to be like you. It's just that I understand you, and I'm trying to use my intelligence to get you to understand that situation. But it's very easy for us, because we're in the power side, to feel like guys like Victor really want to play for us, to help us in the opposite situation. And that's not really what he wants to do. That's why I feel incredibly privileged when I go up there. And these guys just accept me. They just take me straight in. And as Vic would say, and I don't go there to be a pretend blackfella. That's not what I'm there for. And they don't want me to do that. Because if that happens, that's me also being powerful enough to be a pretend blackfella. It's better if I'm just a white fella, being in awe and very gracious with their generosity and vice versa. Because they were very gracious about me being there. I thought it was great that I was there. I thought it was great that, there was another, let's be honest, there was another brain there thinking for Jimmy. Because I can't help it. Victor said he wants me to go back up there so I can teach them more about the way white fellas structure their thinking when you're in white fella structure, which is what running a station is. It's complex.
Victor, would you say that, like your sister, you're an endangered?
I can't hear you.
Would you say that you, like your sister, are an endangered species as well, in that sense of what you're describing?
Well, the chances are, see, when people have choices that they can make, and they can then decide whether they're going to go down that road or not, that's a really good thing. And when I go there, and I talk philosophy to them. I mean, I don't tell them the dog's name is philosophy. You can call the dog whatever you like, but it's still philosophy, you know, because you're asking them what to think, and generally all my sentences when I talk to them is, can you help me? What do you think of this and all of that? So it's always an open question to get them to think. And Billy is now starting to talk now and engage, but they can sit down for 3-4 hours, not say a word, and just listen to the conversation around them. And I can ask them to participate by putting the question to them. But you've got no idea of what they know and what their skills are until you actually see them doing something. Because they won't volunteer any of that. Because they don't have the vocabulary and they can't articulate that. But when you are with them, be they male or female, and you're talking to them, that's when you get it out. Because see, and one of the things that I do like about Aboriginal culture is that ignorance is an excuse. So if you haven't been through the law and you transgress, it's because you didn't know. But in white society, that's not the case. So I've had situations where I've been in a vehicle in the middle of three of us in a car. I've been in the middle of the driver and the other bloke on the passenger side. And Glenn run across the road, middle of the day, no cloud. He ran around a termite mound and went into a hole. This guy walks over to it, reaches into his pocket, and he pulls out a little tiny pocket mirror and he reflects the sun rays into the hole and lights the hole up. And he said, oh, there's his tail. And he pulls the granite out and bangs and kills it. And I'm saying every back on the car walks around with a bloody piece of glass, a piece of mirror in their pocket. And this is the middle of nowhere. These people, they always surprise me. They don't see it as outside the norm.
But Trevor was asking whether you're an endangered species.
Huh?
Trevor was asking whether you think you're an endangered species. You.
Me?
Yeah.
No. I can't do that.
So Victor's crossover man. That's his skill set. Yeah. He knows us and he knows blackfellas.
Yeah, so my question is that seems like a rarity, and is that becoming more rare or less rare?
What's that is? Explain.
Are you as crossover man, is that a rare thing now? Are there other people like you?
It's only Jimmy that I've met that I want to be like if I'm not me, that's all. I've not met any others.
It's really a generosity thing, yeah. Yeah. He is quite an unusual character. Yeah. Because of his openness, but his family's like that. I've met a couple of his sisters. Yeah. I mean, this guy's so, I don't mind saying, this guy's so rare that in his family there's 2 Orders of Australia and two PhDs. And he's not one of them. That's for any family, that's pretty remarkable. For a blackfella family from the West Kimberley, that's amazing. That's pretty impressive, yeah. So his family might be an endangered species because but that's just rare. It's not like his sister, who's an endangered species because just knowing 16 languages, 16 dialects, is just quite incredible. The scary bit for her though is that no one in her immediate family trail is like her. So she's the end of the line. Jimmy's the same. It's really difficult for Jimmy because none of his sons are picking up the mantle that he's now carrying. But his daughters are. But it's a difficult thing for his daughters they probably won't be station managers. So some of his skill set, and it's because he's a guy and they're women, that traditional crossover can't happen. So it gets tricky. Yeah. It's weird. Am I correct in that? I think I'm correct in saying that. Yeah.
In 2000, I was sitting down at the hotel with my mate looking at my payslip. I was paying 49 cents in the dollar tax, PAYE. I said to my mate, I said, one day for Johnny out, one day for me. So I quit. I went out to the community. For 6 years I didn't do anything. I just went fishing and hunting and just lived in the community. And then people started asking me to help them do this and do that. Next thing I'm back on the merry-go-round. But I've not had a paid job since 2000. And the thing with it is that whole aspect of when you're working, how much money do you want, what do you want it for, and what are you going to do with it when you go up the hill?
See, I told you it was rare. Hasn't worked since 2000. How did he get here? Somehow he got it. How did he get here? Somehow he got here again. Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing, Victor. It's amazing. I don't know how you do it. Yeah. Yeah. There'd be a lot of people in this room thinking, shit, that's my job. I want that job. Yeah. It's not easy. I can vouch for that bit. Yeah. Yeah.
When I go back to the community, like, someone will say, I want you to go to, like last year they said, I want you to go to France, to Charles de Mézières, so I go to France. I come back, go to the community, no one asked me where I've been, what I've been doing, or anything. I'm there. They don't say, where you been? I went to China, come back, go there. No. They don't ask you anything, they're here. And generally, when people who want to come there and put up with the lifestyle, they don't want to leave. And he was the case in point.
Sure. Would happily have stayed there for much longer. I feel like I should still be there, kind of lending a hand. Don't have to help you bastards. So.
Jimmy worries about your welfare.
Yeah, I know. It's amazing. He's worried about me. Jesus. Should buy him a new hat.
Jimmy never went to school past 10-year-old. He was riding horses at 10-year-old. His grandson Lyle was able to drive bulldozers, drive graders, bobcats at 12-year-old. He'd go out with Jimmy when Jimmy was doing those things. But no academic education. And because my background is teaching, and I tell people, education is forever, it doesn't have to be academic. And the thing
You're not allowed to say that here, Victor.
the more that people do things and travel around, that's it. Maya rang me up out of the blue after my mate, Ian rings me. So yeah, you can come. And now, we're going to be the richer for it in that community.
Yeah, that's the bit that I have to feel very grateful for, that, you know, I assume both these guys and me get a huge amount from that. That's pretty rare these days. Unfortunately, it's pretty rare. So even though Dan's gone, I think it's Dan, you know, if you do rock into those communities, Victor's right, they're incredibly generous. It's just you have to get past the image of them, and they just look completely dishevelled and dangerous. It just dials up danger. The woman the couple who are building the bow shelter, the woman, the wife, she was amazing. She had stories about helping blackfellas. She said recently, at the middle of the night, she was driving down a dirt road, and there was a Commodore off the road, and there were 12 young Aboriginal blokes there with a dead car, right? And she pulled up, no problems. Pulled them out of the bog, got them going, felt completely safe. She said if it was night time and there were even 3 white fellas there where they were, she probably wouldn't pull over. And she was serious. She just said, I felt completely no problems about doing it. More probably because there's a big chance where she was that she would know someone either who was there or someone who knew one of those guys. And just like Victor said, as soon as you can say a name, you're in. So that kind of evenness is quite different to the way we would operate. But she said she just felt completely safe by it. And just, you know, just for sheer raw numbers, because it still was amazing, she would travel around everywhere. She was an amazing lady. And she was in a Toyota Prado, and I just asked her, you know, boy stuff, you know, how's the Prado? She said, oh, it's pretty good. How long you had it? just about 3 years. How many Ks you done? He said, just about to tip over 320,000 Ks. So, go, you drive it a bit, do you? I said, yeah, it's not bad. And that was her driving. And she was out there dealing with teaching these guys trades, getting them out of jail, getting their jail time used up in community service. Amazing people. So you do see quite incredible people helping and assisting. But shit, they're up against it, I tell you. Yeah. Anyway, we should call it quits because we've gone on for way too long. So thanks, Victor, for hooking in as well. So thanks, guys.